The cold had stopped hurting. That was the thought drifting through Marin's consciousness like smoke, distant, detached, and strangely peaceful. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore, couldn't feel the wind that had been slicing through her thin cloak for what seemed like hours. The snow beneath her had become almost comfortable, a soft white bed inviting her to simply close her eyes and let the darkness take her. Her mind wandered to strange places. Her mother's kitchen, warm with bread baking, the scent of yeast and honey filling the small space. Her father's study before everything fell apart, books stacked high and papers covered in his careful handwriting, ink stains on his fingers as he traced columns of numbers with quiet satisfaction. Hamish laughing at something foolish, back when laughter came easily to their family, before debt collectors started knocking and creditors stopped extending grace. She could almost smell her mother's lavender soap, could almost hear her father humming off-key while he worked, could almost feel the warmth of a life that existed only in memory now. Then heat exploded against her skin. Strong arms lifted her from the frozen ground, and warmth pressed against her body with the shocking intimacy of an embrace. Wool and leather, and something deeper. Wood smoke and pine, and the sharp bite of whiskey. She was moving, being carried, though her legs refused to cooperate with whatever was happening. The scent of him surrounded her completely. Masculine and clean beneath the winter air, with notes of cedar and something earthier she couldn't name. His chest was solid against her cheek, rising and falling with exertion as he moved through the snow. She could feel the rhythm of his breathing, the controlled power in his stride, the way he held her as if she weighed nothing at all. Voices cut through the fog in her mind. Male voices, urgent and commanding. Get the doors open. Now. Is she breathing? Barely. Fetch the physician. And blankets, as many as you can find. Marin tried to speak, to protest, to understand what was happening, but her lips were numb and her tongue felt thick and useless. All she could manage was a weak sound that might have been a word, or might have been nothing at all. Easy. The voice was close now, rumbling against her ear. The vibration of it seemed to travel through her entire body, settling somewhere deep in her chest. Don't try to talk. You're safe. Safe. The word wrapped around her like the warmth now surrounding her body. She wanted to believe it, wanted to sink into that promise and let it carry her away from the nightmare of the past 12 hours. The overturned carriage, the cowardly driver who'd fled into the storm, the endless trudging through snow that reached her knees until her body simply refused to go any further. But safety was a luxury Marin Ashford had learned not to trust. Her eyes fluttered open. Firelight. She was inside somewhere, a large room with rough stone walls blackened by centuries of hearth smoke and a massive fireplace where flames crackled and roared. Iron chandeliers hung from timber beams overhead, their candles adding to the golden glow. Tapestries hung between iron sconces, depicting hunting scenes and Highland battles, warriors on horseback, and stags fleeing through ancient forests. The air smelled of burning peat and something savory. Venison, perhaps, or mutton stew. People surrounded her, their faces blurred by her struggling vision. Women in wool and homespun, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern, hands clasped or pressed against mouths in worry. Men with weathered faces and calloused hands, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, despite the cold still lingering in her bones. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, eyes wide with wonder at the stranger who had appeared from the storm, and the man holding her. She became aware of him in pieces, the arms cradling her against a broad chest, muscles taut beneath his hunting jacket. The jaw set like granite above her head, shadowed with a day's worth of stubble. Dark hair, nearly black, falling across a forehead creased with focus, and eyes, God above, those eyes, the color of winter storms over the loch, gray threaded with silver and fierce with intelligence. They held depths she couldn't fathom, shadows and secrets, and something that looked almost like recognition, as if he'd been waiting for her to appear from the snow all along. He was looking down at her like she was a problem he hadn't anticipated, but fully intended to solve. "Where?" Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. She swallowed against the dryness in her throat and tried again. "Where am I?" "Craigmore," the man said. His voice was deep, cultured, with the barest hint of Highland burr beneath the educated tones. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed. "You collapsed half a mile from the village. My hunting party found you." Craigmore. The name meant nothing to her. She'd been heading for Edinburgh, for the position her brother Hamish had promised was waiting. A governess role in a respectable household. A chance to rebuild what remained of their shattered family fortunes. I should... She tried to sit up, but his arms tightened, holding her firmly in place. The movement brought her closer to his chest, and she could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong against her shoulder. "What you need," he said, his voice brooking no argument, "is warmth, rest, and to stop moving before you worsen the frostbite I suspect is already setting into your extremities." A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. Marin's face heated, despite the chill still clinging to her body. She was acutely aware of her position, cradled in a stranger's arms like a child, her sodden dress clinging to every curve of her frame, her hair matted and wild around her face. Her mother would be mortified. Her father would have challenged this man to a duel back when he still had the spirit for such things. "Please." She pushed weakly against his chest, feeling the solid muscle beneath his hunting jacket. "I can stand. I'm quite capable of..." "You're quite capable of dying in a snowbank, apparently." His tone was sharp, but something flickered in those winter-gray eyes. Concern, perhaps, or irritation. She couldn't tell which. "Forgive me if I'm disinclined to test your other capabilities at the moment." The doors to the hall burst open, bringing with them a gust of frozen air that made the fire dance and the candles gutter. 3 new figures entered, their silhouettes stark against the white world beyond. 2 women and a man, all wrapped in furs and wool, snow still clinging to their shoulders like scattered diamonds. The older woman led the charge, her silver hair swept beneath an elegant cap trimmed with ermine, her bearing aristocratic despite the rough surroundings. Her face was handsome rather than beautiful, carved by time into something commanding. She moved with the authority of someone who expected the world to arrange itself according to her preferences, and usually got her way. "Calder." Her voice cut through the room like a blade. "What in heaven's name is happening? We received word there was an emergency." She stopped. Her eyes found Marin, still held in the man's arms, and something complicated crossed her face. Surprise, assessment, calculation. The kind of rapid evaluation that spoke of decades navigating treacherous social waters. "Who?" the older woman said slowly, each word precise and weighted. "Is this?" The man, Calder, she'd called him, shifted his grip on Marin, drawing her infinitesimally closer. A protective gesture, though whether he was protecting her or claiming her, she couldn't determine. A traveler. Her carriage met with an accident in the storm. She would have frozen to death if we hadn't found her when we did. How fortunate for her, then. The words were polite, but the woman's eyes remained sharp as Highland steel. Though I confess, this seems a rather intimate method of rescue. Heat flooded Marin's cheeks. She renewed her struggle to free herself, desperate to escape this humiliating position, But Calder's arms remained immovable as iron bands. "Put me down," she hissed. "Please." He ignored her. His attention was fixed on the older woman with an intensity that suggested their conversation contained depths Marin couldn't fathom. "She needs care. A warm room, dry clothes, hot broth. I'll see to the arrangements." "You'll see to them?" The woman's eyebrow arched with practiced skepticism. "Personally?" "Grandmother." The warning in his voice was unmistakable. Grandmother. Marin's mind raced, piecing together fragments. The deference of the villagers, the quality of his clothing beneath the hunting leathers, the way everyone in this room seemed to orbit around him like planets around the sun. "Forgive me." The younger of the two women stepped forward, her dark hair escaping its pins in charming disarray, her brown eyes warm with curiosity and mischief. She moved with boundless energy, practically bouncing on her heels. But shouldn't someone introduce themselves? The poor thing looks absolutely terrified. "She's not a thing, Elsa," Calder said. "No, she's a half-frozen woman being held like a prize catch while everyone talks around her." The girl, Elsa, approached with a gentle smile that seemed entirely genuine. "I'm Lady Elsa Blackwood. This stern mountain holding you captive is my brother, Calder Blackwood, Duke of Dunmorrow. And the formidable woman examining you like a ledger entry is our grandmother, the Dowager Duchess." Duke, the word crashed through Marin's awareness with the force of an avalanche. She was being held, cradled, clutched, practically embraced by a duke. In front of his grandmother, in front of an entire village of watching eyes, in a dress that was soaked through and clinging to every curve of her body, with her hair wild and her face surely a disaster of cold reddened skin and chapped lips. "Put me down." This time it wasn't a request. "Put me down this instant." Something shifted in the Duke's expression, that flicker again. Amusement now. She was certain of it, though it disappeared as quickly as it came. Slowly, carefully, he lowered her feet to the ground. Her knees buckled immediately. He caught her before she could collapse, one arm wrapping around her waist, steadying her against the solid warmth of his body. The contact was improper, scandalous, the stuff that ruined reputations and destroyed futures. And everyone in the room was watching. "Perhaps," the Dowager Duchess said into the weighted silence, her voice carrying the particular chill of aristocratic disapproval, "we should discuss this situation somewhere more private." "There's nothing to discuss," Calder's voice carried across the hall, silencing the whispers that had begun to ripple through the crowd like wind through wheat. "This woman was found on my lands, half dead from exposure. She is under my protection now." Marin's heart lurched. "Your Grace, I assure you, I require no such—" Furthermore, his arm tightened around her waist, a silent command for silence. Given the circumstances of her rescue, the intimacy required to preserve her life, the witnesses present, and the inevitable talk that will spread through the village by morning, there is only one honorable course of action. The Dowager's face went pale as fresh snow. "Calder, you cannot mean. I mean precisely what I'm about to say." He turned, addressing not just his grandmother, but the entire assembled crowd, villagers, servants, the shocked faces of his family. His voice rang through the hall like a proclamation from the throne. "Let it be known that this woman is under my protection. She will remain at Dunmorrow Castle as my guest, and in due course as my bride." The hall erupted. Marin's vision blurred at the edges. This couldn't be happening. She'd simply been trying to survive a snowstorm, to reach Edinburgh, to salvage some fragment of her family's dignity. Now she was standing in a stranger's arms while he announced their betrothal to an entire village. "You're mad," she breathed. The Duke looked down at her, and for one moment, The mask slipped. Behind the aristocratic control, behind the commanding authority, she glimpsed something unexpected. Desperation. Perhaps, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. But you're going to help me anyway. The chaos that followed the Duke's announcement was a blur of raised voices and horrified gasps. Maren stood frozen in the circle of his arm, watching the world she knew crumble around her like ash from a dying fire. The Dowager Duchess had gone from pale to positively ashen, her composure cracking for the first time since she'd entered the hall. Lady Ailsa was bouncing on her heels with barely contained excitement, her brown eyes dancing with delight at the unexpected drama. The villagers whispered behind their hands, eyes bright with the particular gleam of people who'd just witnessed a scandal they couldn't wait to spread across every hearth in the Highlands. And Maren couldn't feel her legs. Calder. The Dowager's voice could have frozen the hearth flames solid. A word. Now. After Miss. The Duke paused, looking down at Maren with something that might have been embarrassment. A faint flush colored his high cheekbones. I confess, I don't actually know your name. Maren. It came out as a croak. Maren Ashford. After Miss Ashford is settled, he continued smoothly, as if announcing impromptu betrothals to half-dead strangers was simply how he spent his Tuesdays. She requires warmth and rest before any further discussions. Further discussions? The Dowager's laugh was sharp as broken glass. You've just announced your engagement to a woman whose name you didn't know 5 seconds ago. What further discussion could possibly be necessary? Grandmother. Don't you grandmother me, Calder Blackwood. She stepped forward, and despite being a full head shorter than her grandson, she somehow managed to loom. Her presence filled the space around her like a physical force. Your father would be spinning in his grave. Your mother, God rest her soul, would be reaching through the veil to box your ears. You cannot simply claim a woman like she's a lost sheep found wandering the moors. Can't I? His voice was dangerously soft. On my lands, in my village, before witnesses who will gossip regardless of what we do now. You could have said nothing. You could have let her be cared for quietly. And when word spread that I'd carried a half-dressed woman through the snow, held her against my body for warmth, brought her into the village in my arms, he shook his head. Her reputation would be in tatters by nightfall. This way, at least, there's a framework, a story that protects rather than destroys. Maren found her voice at last. I don't need your protection. Both Blackwoods turned to look at her, the Dowager with surprise, the Duke with something harder to read. Miss Ashford, he began, I was traveling to Edinburgh for a governess position. My carriage was caught in the storm. The driver panicked and fled. I walked as far as I could until I couldn't walk anymore. She forced strength into her voice, into her spine, though both felt as fragile as spun glass. It was misfortune, not scandal. I thank you for saving my life, but I certainly don't expect you to sacrifice yours in return. The murmurs ceased entirely. Even the fire seemed to quiet, its crackle fading to a soft hiss. Every eye in the hall was fixed upon her now, this strange woman who dared to refuse a duke's protection. Lady Ailsa was staring at her with undisguised admiration. I like her, she announced to no one in particular. Can we keep her? Ailsa, the Duke said wearily. What? She has backbone. Do you know how rare that is? Most women in her position would be fainting, or weeping, or trying to trap you into. She caught herself, cheeks flushing crimson. Not that you're trying to trap him. Obviously. I didn't mean. Perhaps, a new voice cut in. We should continue this conversation somewhere the entire village isn't listening. Maren turned to find the third figure from the doorway stepping forward, a man she hadn't properly noticed before. Tall, broad-shouldered, with russet hair swept back from a face that would have been handsome if not for the calculating gleam in his green eyes. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being welcomed in powerful rooms, but there was something predatory in his grace, something that made her think of a wolf wearing gentleman's clothing. Lord Marchmont. The dowager's tone warmed slightly. "Thank you for being a voice of reason. Always happy to assist, Your Grace." He bowed with flourish, then turned that calculating gaze on Maren. His eyes traveled over her slowly, assessing, dissecting, the kind of look that made her skin crawl. "Though I confess myself curious about our unexpected guest. Ashford, you said? I don't believe I'm familiar with the family." Something cold slithered down Maren's spine. The way he looked at her, appraising, dissecting, reminded her uncomfortably of a merchant examining questionable goods before deciding whether to purchase or discard them. "The Ashfords are a lowland family," the Duke said before Maren could respond. "Respectable, but private. Miss Ashford's father was a merchant of some prominence before his passing." It wasn't quite a lie. Her father wasn't dead, merely broken, drinking himself into an early grave in their cramped Edinburgh lodgings. But the Duke couldn't have known that, which meant he was either guessing or fabricating a history for her from whole cloth. Why would he do that? How tragic. Lord Marchmont's sympathy was about as genuine as a 3-pound note. And now reduced to seeking governess positions, how the mighty fall. "Careful, Marchmont." The Duke's voice dropped to something dangerous, each word sharp as a blade. "You're speaking of my future wife." The two men stared at each other, and Maren felt the tension crackle between them like lightning before a storm. There was history here, old wounds, unspoken grievances, though she couldn't begin to guess their nature. The air between them seemed to thicken, heavy with years of accumulated resentment. "Of course." Lord Marchmont inclined his head with serpentine grace. "Forgive me. I meant no offense to Miss Ashford. I'm simply surprised. We all expected your eventual bride to be someone of rather different circumstances." "Did you?" "Lady Cressida Thornwood has been a guest at Dunmorrow twice this season. The families have been close for generations. One assumed incorrectly." The name hung in the air like poison. Lady Cressida Thornwood. Maren filed it away, adding it to the growing list of things she didn't understand about the situation she'd stumbled into. "Enough!" The dowager's voice cracked like a whip. "This is neither the time nor place for such discussions. Miss Ashford is clearly unwell. She needs rest and proper care before we sort out this situation." "Grandmother," I said enough, Calder. Her eyes were steel. "You've made your grand announcement. Now let the girl recover before you terrify her any further. We'll speak tonight after dinner, when cooler heads might prevail." For a moment, Maren thought the Duke would argue, his jaw set, a muscle flexing beneath the skin. But then he exhaled slowly and released his grip on her waist. She immediately missed the warmth. "Ailsa," he said, "take Miss Ashford to the blue guest chambers. See that she has everything she needs." "With pleasure." Ailsa appeared at Maren's side, looping an arm through hers with easy familiarity. "Come on, then. Let's get you warm and dry, and away from all these scowling faces. I'll tell you everything you need to know about my impossible brother on the way." "Ailsa," the Duke began. "Everything," she repeated cheerfully, already steering Maren toward a side door, including the time he tried to tame a wild stag when he was 12 and ended up in the loch. Despite everything, the cold still aching in her bones, the shock still numbing her mind, the absolute impossibility of her situation, Maren felt her lips twitch toward a smile. They'd barely made it through the doorway when a voice stopped them cold. "Miss Ashford." Lord Marchmont had followed them, his tall frame blocking the corridor ahead. Up close, she could see the sharp edges beneath his handsome face, the too-white smile, the eyes that calculated even as they charmed. There was something reptilian about him, something that made her instinctively want to step back and put distance between them. "I feel we've gotten off on the wrong foot." He reached for her hand before she could pull away, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that felt more like a claim than a courtesy. His lips were cold against her knuckles. "Allow me to properly introduce myself. Rory Marchmont, Earl of Glenvale, an old friend of the family." "Lord Marchmont." She extracted her hand as quickly as politeness allowed, resisting the urge to wipe it on her skirt. "A pleasure." "The pleasure is entirely mine." His smile widened. "I must say, you've created quite a stir. Our Duke is not known for impulsive gestures. Whatever magic you've worked to change that, I'm most curious to understand." "There's no magic, only a snowstorm and unfortunate timing." "Is that all?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice to something intimate and threatening. "Because it seems to me, Miss Ashford, that a woman in your position might have everything to gain from such a convenient rescue, and a man in his position might have everything to lose." Ice crept through Marin's veins. "I'm not sure what you're implying, my lord." "I'm not implying anything, merely observing." He straightened, his smile never wavering. "I do hope you'll be careful, Miss Ashford. Highland winters can be treacherous. One never knows what dangers might be lurking beneath the snow." He bowed and walked away before she could respond, leaving Marin with the distinct impression she'd just been threatened. Ailsa tugged at her arm, her expression troubled. "Don't mind him. Rory's been angling for Calder's position since they were boys. He's all bark and bluster." "Is he?" "Mostly." Ailsa's hesitation lasted only a heartbeat, but Marin noticed it. "Come on. You really do need to rest. And I wasn't joking about that stag story. It's much better with hot tea and a roaring fire." Marin let herself be led away, but she couldn't shake the chill that had settled in her chest. She'd been claimed by a duke she didn't know, threatened by an earl she'd never met, and somewhere out there, a Lady Cressida Thornwood was waiting, a woman who'd expected to become the Duchess of Dunmorrow, until Marin Ashford had fallen into a snowbank and ruined everything. The blue guest chambers were anything but blue. Oh, there were hints of it. A velvet coverlet the color of midnight, curtains that held traces of sapphire in their folds, a painted ceramic vase on the mantel glazed in deepest indigo. But the room was dominated by warmth. A fire roared in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across walls hung with tapestries depicting Highland landscapes in summer, all green hills and purple heather, and skies so blue they made Marin ache for seasons she hadn't yet seen in this strange northern place. The bed was enormous, piled with furs and quilts and pillows embroidered with the blackwood crest, a rearing stag beneath a crown of thistles. She wanted nothing more than to collapse into it and sleep for a century. Instead, she stood by the window, wrapped in a borrowed dressing gown of soft wool, watching the snow continue to fall over the castle grounds. Dunmorrow Castle was a fortress of gray stone and ancient pride, its towers disappearing into the white-gray sky. From her window, she could see the village of Craigmuir nestled in the valley below, smoke rising from 100 chimneys as the storm howled on. Tiny figures moved through the streets, going about their lives, unaware that their duke had just done something that would set every tongue in the Highlands wagging for months to come. Somewhere down there, people were talking about her, the half-frozen stranger the duke had claimed as his bride. By morning, the story would spread to the neighboring villages. By week's end, it would reach Edinburgh. and Marin's chances of quietly disappearing into a respectable governess position would vanish like morning frost. A knock at the door made her turn. "Come in." She expected Ailsa, perhaps, or the maid who'd helped her into the bath and dry clothes. Instead, the door opened to reveal the Duke of Dunmorrow himself. He'd changed from his hunting leathers into more formal attire. A dark coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, a cravat tied with military precision, waistcoat of deep burgundy that caught the firelight. His hair had been tamed, swept back from a face that seemed carved from the same stone as his castle. But his eyes, those gray eyes, pale as morning mist over the loch, held something almost uncertain. "Miss Ashford, may I have a moment?" "I don't believe I have much choice, Your Grace." She kept her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Given that you've just announced our engagement to several dozen witnesses," he had the grace to wince. "Yes, about that." "About that." She folded her arms. "Would you care to explain why a duke would claim a penniless stranger as his bride? Or shall I simply assume you've lost your mind entirely?" The latter isn't entirely inaccurate. He closed the door behind him but remained near it, maintaining a proper distance. "May I sit? It's your castle. It's your room. For as long as you are here, it's your space. I won't intrude further than you permit." Something in his voice, a quiet sincerity beneath the aristocratic polish, made her gesture toward the chair by the fire. He sat, and she remained standing, unwilling to surrender the slight advantage of height. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me considerably more than that." "Yes." He met her eyes without flinching. "I do. And I'll start with the truth, though I suspect you won't like it. I haven't liked anything about this situation since I woke up in your arms, Your Grace. I doubt that will change now." The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect? Swooning? Tears? Desperate gratitude that a duke would deign to claim me?" "Something like that." His smile faded. "What I got was a woman who told me I was mad to my face, in front of my grandmother and half my village. Do you know how long it's been since anyone spoke to me that way? I imagine not long, given your apparent habit of making insane declarations without consultation." This time, his laugh was genuine, a low, rough sound that transformed his severe features into something almost approachable. The sound warmed something in her chest that she refused to examine too closely. "Fair point." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and the formality seemed to drain from his posture. In its place was something wearier. "Rawr. My grandmother has been trying to marry me off for the past year. Since my father died, she's been relentless. Parades of suitable ladies at every social function. Pointed comments about duty and legacy. And most recently, Lady Cressida Thornwood. The name Lord Marchmont mentioned. Yes." His expression darkened. "Cressida is everything a duchess should be. Beautiful, well-bred, impeccably connected. Our families have known each other for generations. My grandmother adores her. And you? I find her insufferable." The words came out flat. "She's calculating, cold, and interested only in my title. Every conversation feels like a negotiation. Every smile is designed to achieve a specific effect. Marrying her would be like shackling myself to a beautiful snake for the rest of my life." Marin shouldn't have felt relief at that. It was none of her business who the Duke married, and yet something loosened in her chest at the venom in his voice. "So you announced our engagement to escape her?" "Partly." He rubbed a hand over his face, and for a moment he looked less like a duke and more like an exhausted man carrying burdens too heavy to bear. "My grandmother was planning to formalize an understanding with Cressida's family at the winter gathering next week. I've been trying to find a way out for months, but nothing I said mattered. Duty, legacy, the good of the family. Every argument I made, she countered. And then I fell into a snowbank. And then you fell into a snowbank. He met her eyes. You have to understand, when I carried you into that hall, I wasn't thinking about anything except getting you warm. But my grandmother's face when she saw us, I knew exactly what she was calculating. The scandal, the whispers, the way Cressida would use your rescue against me, claim I'd been keeping a mistress, that I was unfit for a proper marriage. So you struck first. I gave them a different story, a better story. His voice was quiet. The Duke, who saved a stranger from the snow and fell so instantly in love, he claimed her before the entire village. Romantic, impulsive, the kind of tale that spreads faster than scandal. Marin's mind raced. She could see the logic, twisted, desperate logic, but logic nonetheless. He'd taken a situation that could ruin them both and shaped it into something almost noble. But that didn't make it right. You should have asked me first. I know. You've upended my entire life based on a calculation made in the span of seconds. I know. I was going to Edinburgh. I had a position waiting, a chance to support my family, to rebuild something from the wreckage my brother's schemes have left us. I know. He rose from the chair, and she was struck again by the height of him, the sheer presence he commanded simply by existing. And I know nothing I say can make this right. You didn't ask to be caught in my family's machinations. You didn't ask to be used as a shield against a marriage you have no stake in. No, she agreed. I didn't. He crossed to her, stopping close enough that she could smell that same scent from before. Wood smoke and pine, whiskey and something darker. His eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see past her defenses to the frightened woman underneath. I'm asking now. Will you help me? Stay at Dunmorrow through the winter gathering. Play the role of my betrothed long enough to convince my grandmother that Cressida is no longer an option. And when the spring thaw comes, we'll end the arrangement quietly. A mutual decision. No scandal, no disgrace. I'll provide references, connections, anything you need to secure a better position than the one you lost. That's months. Yes. Months of pretending to be something I'm not. In a castle full of people who will be watching my every move, judging my every word. Yes. Marin turned back to the window. The snow was falling heavier now, blanketing the world in white, erasing paths and landmarks until everything looked the same. She thought of her mother, taking in mending by candlelight to pay the butcher. Her father, lost in bottles and silence. Hamish, always chasing the next scheme, the next promise, the next friend, who swore this time would be different. She thought of the governess position that was probably already filled. The long walk back to Edinburgh, through a winter that might kill her before she arrived. The debts waiting at home, growing larger with every passing day. And she thought of Lord Marchmont's cold eyes, his veiled threat, and the danger lurking beneath his charming smile. 3 conditions, she heard herself say. The Duke went very still. Name them. She turned to face him, lifting her chin. First, I want a letter sent to my family explaining my situation. A respectable explanation. That I've taken a companion position with Lady Alsa. Nothing about betrothals or arrangements. My mother has enough to worry about without adding scandal to the list. Done. Second, when this ends, I want more than references. I want enough money to clear my family's debts and establish my mother in comfortable lodgings. Not charity. Payment for services rendered. I'm helping you escape an unwanted marriage. That has value. Something passed across his features. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. How much? She named a figure. It was more than she'd ever seen in her life, but less than what a duke spent on horses in a single year. His expression didn't change. Done. Third. She stepped closer, close enough to see the individual shards of gray in his eyes, like ice beginning to fracture. The moment you decide you actually want to marry, whether it's Lady Cressida or anyone else, you tell me immediately. I won't be paraded around as your shield while you conduct a real courtship behind my back. I may be poor, Your Grace, but I won't be made a fool. The quiet between them stretched taut as a bowstring. Then the Duke extended his hand. You have my word. All 3 conditions. Do we have an agreement, Miss Ashford? Marin looked at his outstretched hand. Elegant, powerful, belonging to a world she'd never imagined entering. She thought of the snow outside, the cold that had nearly killed her, the life she'd been struggling to survive. She took his hand. We have an agreement, Your Grace. His grip was warm and firm, his fingers closing around hers with surprising gentleness. Something passed between them, a current, a recognition, that made her inhale sharply. Calder, he said, his voice low. I beg your pardon? If we're to be betrothed, you should probably call me Calder, at least when we're not in public. Calder. The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate. And you may call me Marin. Marin. He released her hand slowly, as if reluctant to let go. Welcome to Dunmorrow Castle. I suspect you're going to turn it upside down. She didn't know whether that was a warning or a promise. But as he left her alone in the blue guest chambers, the fire crackling and the snow falling beyond the window, Marin realized something that sent ice through her veins. She wasn't afraid of the arrangement, or the deception, or even the formidable Dowager Duchess waiting to judge her every move. She was afraid of the way her pulse had leaped when he'd said her name, and that, she knew, was far more dangerous than any Highland winter. Morning arrived with pale winter light, and the distant sound of servants she didn't see. Marin woke slowly, disoriented by the softness beneath her. For one blissful moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the snowstorm, the rescue, the impossible announcement that had upended her entire existence. She was simply warm, comfortable, wrapped in linens finer than anything she'd ever touched, floating in that hazy space between sleep and waking where troubles seemed far away. Then memory crashed back like cold water. She sat up, heart racing, and found the blue guest chambers transformed by daylight. The fire had been rebuilt, fresh logs crackling cheerfully, the scent of burning pine filling the room. A breakfast tray waited on the small table by the window. Tea, warm bread, butter, honey, sliced ham, and a small pot of what appeared to be bramble preserves. More food than her family ate in a day. And draped across the chair beside her bed, a dress. It was beautiful. Deep forest green wool, trimmed with delicate embroidery at the cuffs and collar. Tiny leaves and vines worked in thread just a shade darker than the fabric itself. Simple enough to be practical, elegant enough to mark its wearer as someone of consequence. Nothing like the threadbare traveling dress she'd nearly died in. A note was pinned to the sleeve in neat, feminine handwriting. Thought you might need something presentable. The vultures will be circling today. Best to look like you belong. A Marin's throat tightened. Lady Ailsa, already thinking of her comfort, already anticipating the challenges ahead. It was more kindness than she'd experienced in years. A second note lay beneath the first, in different handwriting. Bolder, more masculine, the strokes confident and unhesitating. The letter to your family has been dispatched this morning by private courier. It explains you've taken a position as my sister's companion for the season. No mention of betrothals or arrangements, as promised. See. He'd kept his word, the first of her conditions, already honored within 12 hours. A soft knock preceded the door opening. A young maid with copper hair and freckles entered, curtsying nervously. Her cap was slightly askew, and her apron bore the wrinkles of someone who'd dressed in haste. "Good morning, miss. I'm Fenella. His Grace asked me to attend you during your stay." Fenella? Marin swung her legs over the side of the bed, conscious of how strange this all felt. She'd never had a lady's maid, never had anyone attend her for anything. "That's very kind, but I'm quite capable of dressing myself." "Oh, I'm sure you are, miss." Fenella's eyes widened. "But Lady Ailsa said I should help anyway. She said the buttons on that dress are murder, and you'd never manage alone." Despite everything, Marin felt her lips twitch. Did she now? Her exact words, miss. Also said I should warn you that breakfast in the main hall starts in an hour, and everyone will be watching to see if you faint or flee. I don't intend to do either. That's what Lady Ailsa hoped you'd say. Fenella beamed, revealing a gap between her front teeth. She says you've got spine, miss. Says it's about time someone around here did. The buttons were, in fact, murder. Tiny pearl things that ran up the back in an endless row, each one requiring nimble fingers and considerable patience. Marin submitted to Fenella's assistance, watching in the mirror as she was transformed from a half-drowned stranger into something approaching respectable. The dress fit perfectly. Not the perfection of a garment made for her. There were subtle signs of hasty alteration at the waist and hem, tiny stitches where someone had worked through the night to make adjustments, but close enough to suggest considerable effort had been expended on her behalf. "Whose dress was this?" Marin asked. Fenella hesitated, her hands pausing on the final button. "Lady Ailsa's, miss. From before she decided she preferred riding breeches to ball gowns. She has dozens she never wears. That's very generous of her. Lady Ailsa has a kind heart, always has." Fenella began arranging Marin's dark hair into a simple but elegant style, pinning it back from her face with practiced efficiency. "The household's been buzzing since last night, miss, if you don't mind me saying." "I imagine it has. Some are calling it romantic. The Duke saving you from the snow, claiming you before everyone like something from an old ballad." Fenella's hands paused, hairpin hovering. "Others are saying, others are saying I'm a fortune hunter who threw herself into a snowbank deliberately to trap a duke." The maid's cheeks flushed crimson. "I don't believe that, miss. Anyone can see your quality, even if you've fallen on hard times. And His Grace isn't a fool. He wouldn't claim just anyone." Marin met her own eyes in the mirror. Quality. Such a delicate word for the complicated truth of her existence. The merchant father who'd taught her Latin and mathematics. The mother who'd insisted on proper deportment even as they sold the silver to pay the grocer. She was educated above her station and impoverished below it, belonging nowhere and to no one, until a duke had pulled her from the snow and changed everything. "Thank you, Fenella," she said, her voice soft. "For your kindness. Just speaking truth, miss." The maid finished pinning her hair and stepped back to admire her work. "There. You look like you belong in a castle." Marin wasn't sure that was true, but when she descended the stairs and entered the great hall, she held her head high anyway. The hall was smaller than she'd expected from last night's chaos, or perhaps it had simply felt larger when she was half frozen and surrounded by staring strangers. In daylight, it was almost welcoming. Morning sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny fairies in the air. A long table dominated the center, laden with breakfast dishes that steamed and glistened. Portraits of stern Blackwood ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following her progress across the room. And at the head of the table sat the Dowager Duchess, watching Marin's entrance with the focused attention of a hawk spotting prey. "Miss Ashford," her voice carried across the room. "How good of you to join us. I trust you slept well?" "Very well, Your Grace. Thank you for your hospitality." "My hospitality." The dowager's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, do come sit. We have much to discuss." Marin had barely taken 3 steps when Ailsa appeared at her elbow, materializing from somewhere behind a sideboard with the stealth of a cat. "Don't let her intimidate you," Ailsa breathed. "She's testing to see if you'll crumble. My brother's already been summoned to the study for a private lecture. You're next." "Wonderful. Just remember, she respects strength. Cry and she'll eat you alive. Fight back and she might actually like you. And if I simply run screaming from the castle, then I'll be terribly disappointed and forced to marry some boring viscount for entertainment." Ailsa squeezed her arm. "You've got this. I can tell." Marin wished she shared that confidence. Breakfast was an exercise in subtle warfare. The dowager asked pointed questions about Marin's family, her education, her prospects, before the snowstorm had derailed them. Each answer was received with a slight narrowing of the eyes, a fractional tilt of the head, an assessment that never quite became approval. Lord Marchmont was present, contributing observations that seemed friendly, but carried barbs beneath the surface. His green eyes tracked her movements with unsettling interest, and she found herself angling her chair to keep him in her peripheral vision, watching for any sign of threat. Lady Ailsa deflected what she could, steering the conversation towards safer waters whenever possible, but even her cheerful energy couldn't fully dispel the tension that hung over the table like storm clouds. And Calder, the Duke, was absent. "My grandson is attending to estate business," the dowager said, when Marin's eyes strayed to the empty chair at the head of the table. "He'll join us for dinner. In the meantime, Miss Ashford, I thought you and I might take tea in my private sitting room." It wasn't a request. "I would be honored, Your Grace." "I'm sure you would." The dowager rose, her black silk rustling like whispered warnings. "Shall we say 3 o'clock? That will give you time to—" "Settle in." She swept from the hall without waiting for a response. Ailsa exhaled heavily. "Well, that wasn't as bad as it could have been. She's going to interrogate me." "Thoroughly and without mercy, yes." Ailsa linked her arm through Marin's. "But you survived breakfast without fainting, so you're already ahead of the last 3 women grandmother tried to match with Calder. One of them actually wept into her porridge. That's not encouraging. It wasn't meant to be. Come on, I'll show you the castle before you face the dragon in her lair. You should at least know the layout of the battlefield." The tour that followed was overwhelming in the best possible way. Dunmorrow Castle was ancient, sprawling, and full of hidden corridors and secret alcoves, and rooms that seemed to have been forgotten by everyone except the dust and the mice. Stone walls several feet thick kept the cold at bay, while tapestries and rugs added splashes of color to otherwise gray spaces. Ailsa narrated cheerfully, pointing out the tower where their great-great-grandfather had supposedly kept a mistress, the gallery where portraits of every Blackwood duke hung in stern succession, the kitchen gardens visible through frost-covered windows, where herbs grew in orderly rows beneath protective glass. "And this," Ailsa said, pushing open a heavy oak door carved with intertwining thistles, "is Calder's sanctuary. The library." Marin's breath caught. The room was 2 stories tall, every wall lined with books from floor to ceiling. Ladders on rails allowed access to the upper shelves, their brass fittings gleaming in the light from tall windows. A massive fireplace dominated one end, leather chairs positioned before it for reading, a small table between them bearing a decanter of amber liquid and 2 crystal glasses. The scent of old paper and wood polish hung in the air like incense, mixed with something fainter. Perfume, perhaps, long faded, but somehow still present. "He spends hours in here," Ilsa said, her voice hushed with something like reverence. "Especially since Father died. Sometimes I think he's hiding from the world. Other times, I think he's searching for something he'll never find." "What happened to your father?" Ailsa's brightness dimmed. "A riding accident. Last spring. Father was an excellent horseman, but his mount spooked at something in the woods. A snake, perhaps, or a shadow. He was thrown." She swallowed hard. "Calder was in Edinburgh on business. By the time word reached him, Father was already gone." "I'm sorry. Everyone is." Ailsa's voice held an edge of old pain. "But sorry doesn't bring him back. And sorry doesn't stop Grandmother from pushing Calder toward a marriage he doesn't want, as if producing an heir will somehow fill the void Father left." Marin noticed a particular bookshelf near the window, its volumes more worn than the others, their spines faded and cracked from frequent handling. "Were those your father's favorites?" "Some of them. Mother's, too. She died when I was born. But Father kept all her books exactly as she left them." Ailsa touched one spine gently, her finger tracing the faded gold lettering. "Calder says he can still smell her perfume when he opens them. I think that's why he comes here so often. It's the only place he feels close to either of them anymore." Marin thought of her own father, lost in different ways, the void left by failure instead of death, the slow erosion of a man who'd once been brilliant and bold. "Grief makes people desperate," she said quietly. "They grasp at solutions that don't solve anything because the alternative is accepting there is no solution." Ailsa studied her for a long moment. "You understand. Most people don't. I understand more than I'd like to." The clock in the corner chimed 2. 1 hour until she faced the Dowager. 1 hour until everything would be decided. The Dowager's private sitting room was a study in controlled elegance. Every surface gleamed with meticulous care, mahogany polished until it shone like dark water, brass fixtures buffed to golden perfection. Porcelain figurines stood in precise arrangements on the mantelpiece, shepherdesses and saints frozen in attitudes of eternal serenity. The chairs were positioned at exact angles to the fire, not a degree off, as if someone had measured with mathematical precision. Even the tea service, delicate bone china painted with Highland thistles, seemed to follow some invisible rule of placement that Marin couldn't quite discern, but could sense nonetheless. This was a woman who left nothing to chance. "Sit." The Dowager gestured to the chair opposite her own. "And please, spare me the false pleasantries. We both know why you're here." Marin sat, keeping her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap, proper posture her mother had drilled into her since childhood. To be evaluated, judged, found wanting. How refreshingly direct. The Dowager poured tea with practiced grace, each movement economical and precise. "Most young women in your position would be attempting to charm me, complimenting the furnishings, expressing gratitude for my hospitality. You cut straight to the bone. Would flattery serve me better? Not in the slightest. I despise sycophancy." The Dowager passed her a cup, the china so thin Marin could see light through it. "Which is precisely why Lady Cressida grates on my nerves, despite being perfect in every other respect. The woman agrees with everything I say. It's exhausting." Marin nearly choked on her tea. "I thought you wanted the Duke to marry her." "I want my grandson to marry someone suitable." "Cressida is suitable. That doesn't mean I enjoy her company." The Dowager's eyes were sharp over the rim of her cup. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Ashford. The truth this time. Not the polished version Calder invented to spare your dignity. The truth. Such a simple word for such a complicated thing. My father was a merchant in Glasgow, Marin began slowly, measuring each word. Textiles mostly. He built the business from nothing, made a success of it through cleverness and hard work. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, respectable. He trusted the wrong partner, a man he'd known for years, someone he considered a friend. They invested together in a shipping venture. The ship sank. The insurance was fraudulent. By the time the truth came out, we'd lost everything. The Dowager's expression remained neutral, giving nothing away. And your father? Broke, in spirit more than body. Marin's voice didn't waver, though the words cost her. He blames himself for trusting, for failing to see what was right in front of him. He spent the last 2 years at the bottom of a bottle, trying to forget. And your mother? Takes in mending, stretches every penny until it screams, refuses to admit we've fallen as far as we have. Siblings? A brother? Hamish. Marin's jaw tightened. He means well, but chooses poorly. Friends who promise opportunities that never materialize. Schemes that always fail. It was his friend who arranged my governess position in Edinburgh. I was halfway there when the storm hit. The Dowager set down her cup with a precise click. So, a ruined merchant's daughter, impoverished, desperate, traveling alone through a Highland winter to take a servant's position because your family has no other options. Yes. And you expect me to believe you didn't engineer this situation? That you didn't know exactly which road would take you past Dunmorrow lands, didn't calculate when to collapse, where you'd be most likely to be found? The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Marin met the older woman's gaze without flinching. If I had the ability to control snowstorms and predict the movements of ducal hunting parties, your grace, I would have used those powers to prevent my father's ruin in the first place. As it stands, I am merely a woman who was cold and tired and didn't want to die in a snowbank. A long pause stretched between them. Then, impossibly, the Dowager laughed. It was a sharp sound, rusty from disuse, but genuine, the laugh of someone who had nearly forgotten how. Lord above, you actually mean that. I don't know how to be anything other than honest. It's a failing, I'm told. It's a rarity. The Dowager leaned back in her chair, studying Marin with new eyes. Do you know why I push Calder toward marriage? Why I've paraded eligible women through this castle for the past year? Because he needs an heir. Because duty demands it. Because he's dying. The words fell like stones into water. Not physically. His body is perfectly sound. But his spirit, his heart, the part of him that makes life worth living, that died with his father. Marin's chest tightened. She thought of the empty chair at breakfast, the library Elsa had described as his sanctuary, the way he'd looked at her last night when he thought she couldn't see, lost, drowning, desperate for something he couldn't name. He won't speak of it, the Dowager continued, her voice softer now. Won't acknowledge the grief that's consuming him. He buries himself in estate business, in parliamentary duties, in the endless performance of being a duke. But he's not living. He's merely existing. And you thought a wife would fix that? I thought a wife would give him something to live for, someone to pull him back from the edge before he slips over entirely. The Dowager's eyes glistened, though no tears fell. Cressida would never manage it. She's too cold, too calculating. She'd give him heirs and social standing and perfect dinner parties, but she'd never reach the man underneath. Why are you telling me this? Because last night, when Calder carried you into that hall, I saw something I haven't seen in a year. The Dowager leaned forward. I saw him react, not perform. React. His announcement was impulsive, reckless, utterly unlike him. And when you told him he was mad, when you pushed back instead of simpering with gratitude. He smiled. Actually smiled. Do you understand how rare that is? Maren didn't know what to say. The conversation had shifted beneath her feet, and she was no longer sure of the ground. And I will protect him with my dying breath. The threat was absolute. And somehow, it was also the closest thing to a blessing Maren could have hoped for. I understand, Your Grace. Do you? I wonder. The Dowager rose, signaling the end of their meeting. The winter gathering begins in 3 days. Every noble family in the Highlands will be here, including Lady Cressida and her mother, who have not yet received word of my grandson's change of heart. That sounds like it will be eventful. That, Miss Ashford, is an understatement of magnificent proportions. The Dowager moved toward the door, then paused, looking back over her shoulder. One more thing. My grandson is in the library. He's been hiding there since our conversation this morning, no doubt brooding over something or other. Perhaps you might draw him out. It wasn't a request, but as Maren left the sitting room and made her way through the castle corridors, she found herself wondering whether it was a test, an order, or something else entirely. Perhaps even the Dowager didn't know. She found him exactly where his grandmother had predicted, standing by the library window, silhouetted against the gray afternoon light, like a figure carved from shadow. He didn't turn when she entered, though the slight tension in his shoulders suggested he knew she was there. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with dancing light and warmth. Snow continued to fall beyond the glass, fat flakes drifting past like scattered thoughts, blanketing the world in endless white. Your grandmother said I'd find you here, Maren finally said. My grandmother says a great many things. His voice was rough, distant, most of them designed to achieve specific outcomes. She told me about your father. Now he turned. The mask was firmly in place, aristocratic control, ducal composure, but his eyes betrayed him. Shadowed with exhaustion, clouded with something he couldn't quite hide. Pain, perhaps, or simply the weariness of carrying too much for too long. Did she? And what exactly did she tell you? That you're drowning. That she's been trying to throw you lifelines you refuse to grab. Maren moved closer, stopping a careful distance away. That you smiled last night for the first time in a year, and it terrified her nearly as much as it gave her hope. A muscle in his cheek twitched. She exaggerates. Does she? I smile. I attend functions, make conversation, and fulfill my duties. I'm a perfectly adequate duke. Adequate isn't the same as alive. The words hung between them, sharp and true. Calder's composure cracked, just slightly. A flinch, a flicker of something wounded before the wall slammed back into place. You've known me less than a day, Miss Ashford. Forgive me if I question your expertise on my emotional state. You're right. I barely know you. She held her ground, refusing to be intimidated. But I know grief. I know what it looks like when someone's walking through life without actually living it. And I know the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from pretending everything's fine when it's actually falling apart. Maren, my father was brilliant once. Did I tell you that? He could look at a ledger and see patterns no one else noticed. He built a business from nothing through sheer force of will and cleverness. And then he lost it all. And instead of grieving, instead of admitting how much it hurt, he just disappeared. Crawled inside a bottle and let the rest of us watch him fade away. Her voice cracked on the last words, and she hated herself for it. This wasn't about her. This wasn't supposed to be about her. But Calder was looking at her differently now. The walls had lowered, just slightly, and behind them was something almost like recognition. I'm sorry, he said, his voice gentler. About your father. And I'm sorry about yours. Truly. Not because it's what one says, but because I understand what it costs to lose someone you depended on, to have the foundation knocked out from under you when you weren't prepared. The quiet between them softened, less guarded, more honest. He was teaching me, Calder said finally. When he died, there was so much I still needed to learn about the estates, the tenants, the 1,000 small decisions that keep a duchy functioning. He was supposed to have years left, decades. Time to show me everything, to help me grow into the role. His laugh was bitter. Instead, I got a letter in Edinburgh, and a funeral I barely remember, and a grandmother who started parading potential brides through the castle before the grave had settled. She's afraid for you. She's trying to control me. Both can be true. Marin moved to the window, standing beside him, looking out at the snow. People show love in strange ways when they're scared. Sometimes, the harder they push, the more desperate they are underneath. Calder was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Any of it. Be a duke. Manage a duchy. Choose a wife. Live a life that suddenly feels like it belongs to someone else. He ran a hand through his hair, destroying its careful arrangement. Everyone looks at me like I should have answers, like the title came with instructions I somehow misplaced, and I just keep pretending, day after day, hoping no one notices I have no idea what I'm doing. Maybe that's the secret, Marin said slowly. Maybe no one actually knows what they're doing. Maybe we're all just pretending and hoping. That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be true. He turned to look at her, really look, and something shifted in the air between them. The careful distance they'd been maintaining suddenly felt inadequate, like a wall made of paper trying to hold back a flood. You're not what I expected, he said. When I carried you out of that snow, I thought. I don't know what I thought. That you'd be simple, perhaps, easily managed, a convenient solution to an inconvenient problem. And instead you're complicated and honest, and you look at me like you actually see me. Not the Duke, not the title. Just, he trailed off, shaking his head. I don't know how to finish that sentence. Then don't. Marin's heart was racing, and she couldn't seem to make it slow. We have 3 days before the winter gathering, 3 days before Lady Cressida arrives, and the real performance begins. Perhaps we should focus on preparing for that, rather than trying to define something we barely understand. It was the sensible thing to say, the safe thing, the thing that kept them both at arm's length where they belonged. So why did it feel like running away? The winter gathering. Calder's expression hardened, the walls rebuilding themselves. Yes, we should discuss what to expect, the families who will attend, the dynamics at play, the particular dangers you'll need to navigate. Dangers? Lady Cressida won't take this news well. She's been planning this match for years, positioning herself, cultivating my grandmother's favor, eliminating rivals. When she discovers a stranger has appeared from nowhere and claimed what she considers rightfully hers, she'll try to destroy me, thoroughly and without mercy. His fists clenched at his sides. But she won't succeed. I'll make sure of that. The protective edge in his voice did something strange to Marin's chest, something warm and unsettling that she absolutely couldn't afford to examine. Your grandmother mentioned there would be dancing, she said, deliberately changing the subject. The gathering includes a tailith on the second night, traditional Highland dancing. Will that be a problem? I can dance. My mother made sure of that, even when we couldn't afford much else. Then we should practice. He held out his hand. If we're to convince everyone we're genuinely betrothed, we need to move like we're comfortable with each other. Marin stared at his outstretched hand, the same hand that had pulled her from the snow, that had sealed their impossible bargain, that belonged to a world she'd never imagined entering. She took it. His palm was warm against hers, calloused in unexpected places. Not the soft hands of idle nobility, but the hands of a man who worked alongside his tenants. He drew her closer, one hand settling at her waist with careful precision, maintaining exactly the proper distance. "There's no music," she pointed out. "Then we'll have to imagine it." They began to move, slowly at first, finding each other's rhythm, learning the language of matched movement. It should have felt awkward, this silent dance in an empty library. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "You're better than I expected," Calder murmured. "You sound surprised." "I'm frequently surprised by you. I'm starting to suspect it's going to become a pattern." She looked up at him, intending to respond with something clever, something that would break the tension building between them. But his eyes caught hers and held, gray as winter storms, and suddenly clever seemed very far away. "Calder!" The library door crashed open. "Your Grace." A servant stood in the doorway, breathing hard, face flushed with alarm. "Forgive the interruption, but there's a carriage approaching from the South Road." Calder released Marin so quickly she stumbled. "Who?" "The Thornwood Crest, Your Grace. Lady Cressida has arrived 3 days early." The color drained from Calder's face. In the sudden quiet, Marin could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. 3 days to prepare had just become no time at all. And the woman who'd expected to become the Duchess of Dunmorrow was about to discover she'd been replaced. Lady Cressida Thornwood was everything Marin was not. She descended from her carriage like a queen, arriving at her rightful throne. Golden hair arranged in perfect curls beneath an elegant bonnet trimmed with silk roses. Traveling dress of rose-pink silk that somehow remained immaculate despite hours of Highland roads. Complexion like porcelain and just as cold. Her movements were precise, choreographed, each gesture designed to display her figure to its best advantage. Behind her came an older woman, who could only be her mother, Lady Thornwood, wearing the satisfied expression of someone who believed victory was already assured. She surveyed Dunmorrow Castle with proprietary approval, as if mentally redecorating. Marin watched from the library window as the dowager greeted them in the courtyard below. The exchange was too distant to hear, but the body language spoke volumes. Lady Cressida's confident smile, her mother's proprietary air, the way they moved toward the castle entrance as if they already owned it. "She's beautiful." The words tasted like ash. "She's a snake in silk." Ailsa had appeared beside her, expression uncharacteristically serious. "Don't let the face fool you. Cressida Thornwood has been planning to become Duchess of Dunmorrow since we were children. She'll do whatever it takes to eliminate anything standing in her way. Including me. Especially you." The door opened behind them, and Calder entered, his face set in hard lines. "They're requesting a formal audience. My grandmother is stalling, but we have perhaps 10 minutes before they must be received." 10 minutes to prepare for battle." Marin turned from the window. "What should I expect? Cressida will be charming at first. She'll welcome you, express delight at making your acquaintance, make you feel like you've misjudged her entirely." His expression darkened. "Then she'll start asking questions, probing for weaknesses. By the end of the conversation, she'll know exactly where to strike. You speak from experience. I speak from years of watching her operate. She's been a guest at Dunmorrow more times than I can count. Every visit, she learns a little more, positions herself a little better. My grandmother invited her. I tolerated her. Neither of us realized quite how dangerous she was until it was too late." "And Lord Marchmont?" Marin remembered the calculating gleam in his eyes, the veiled threat in the corridor. "Where does he fit? Calder and Ailsa exchanged a weighted glance. Rory has his own ambitions, Ailsa said carefully. He's a distant cousin, close enough to the title to covet it, far enough to never legitimately inherit. He's been angling for influence since before Father died. And Cressida? They have an understanding. Calder's voice was flat. If she becomes Duchess, he becomes her closest advisor. They've been working together for years, supporting each other's goals. Alone, either one is manageable. Together. He shook his head. Together. They're formidable. The pieces clicked together in Marin's mind. This wasn't just about a rejected suitor's wounded pride. This was about power, influence, and the control of one of the most prominent duchies in Scotland. And she had stumbled directly into the middle of it. We should go down, she said. Better to face them directly than let them think we're hiding. Calder studied her for a long moment. You don't have to do this. I could make excuses. Say you're still recovering from your ordeal. And let her think I'm afraid. Marin lifted her chin. I've faced worse than a beautiful woman with sharp words. I'll survive. Something passed through his eyes. Admiration, perhaps, or something warmer. Then let's give her something to worry about. He offered his arm. She took it. They descended the stairs together, and Marin was acutely aware of every point of contact. His arm beneath her fingers, the warmth radiating through his sleeve, the way he adjusted his stride to match hers, a small accommodation that felt unreasonably significant. The great hall had been transformed in the brief time since breakfast. Fresh flowers adorned the tables. A fire roared in the hearth, banishing the afternoon chill. Servants moved with precise efficiency, preparing tea and refreshments. And at the center of it all stood Lady Cressida Thornwood, her smile bright as a blade. Your Grace. Her curtsy was perfection itself, a masterwork of grace and practiced submission. How wonderful to see you again. Lady Cressida, Lady Thornwood. Calder's voice was perfectly polite and perfectly distant. Welcome to Dunmorrow. We simply couldn't wait another moment. Lady Thornwood's voice dripped with false sweetness. When we heard about the winter gathering, we knew we must arrive early. So much to prepare, after all. Indeed. Cressida's eyes found Marin, and her smile widened, a predator spotting prey. And this must be the mysterious stranger everyone's been whispering about, the one you pulled from the snow. Miss Marin Ashford. Calder's hand covered Marin's where it rested on his arm, a gesture of possession that sent heat flooding through her. My betrothed. The quiet that followed was absolute. Lady Thornwood's face went white, then red, then settled into something carefully neutral. But Cressida barely flinched. Her smile remained fixed, her eyes glittering with something that might have been amusement, or might have been murder. Betrothed. She repeated the word like tasting something unexpected. How sudden. I wasn't aware you were courting anyone, Your Grace. The circumstances were unusual. But then, genuine affection often defies convention. Genuine affection. Cressida turned that glittering gaze on Marin, examining her from head to toe with clinical precision. And where did you say your family was from, Miss Ashford? Glasgow. Originally. Marin kept her voice steady. Though we've been settled in Edinburgh these past years. Glasgow! The word dripped with condescension. How provincial. I don't believe I'm familiar with the Ashfords. What does your father do? He was a merchant. Textiles. Was? He's retired from business. I see. Cressida's smile sharpened. And your mother? Does she have connections we might recognize? My mother is a gentlewoman of modest means, who raised her children to value honesty over pretension. Marin met Cressida's gaze directly. I find those qualities serve better than connections in most circumstances. A muscle twitched near Cressida's eye, the only sign that the barb had landed. Before Cressida could respond, Lord Marchmont appeared from an alcove, where he'd apparently been observing the exchange. His presence seemed to bolster Cressida's composure, two predators recognizing each other. "What a charming sentiment," he said, his voice silk over steel. "Though I wonder, Miss Ashford, how well honesty and modest means will serve you when you're managing an estate of this size. The Duchess of Dunmorrow has responsibilities that extend far beyond pleasant platitudes." "I'm a quick learner, my lord." "Are you?" He moved closer, positioning himself at Cressida's shoulder like an ally flanking for battle. "Learning is one thing, breeding is another. Some things cannot be taught. They must be inherited. The way one carries oneself in noble company, the instinct for when to speak and when to remain silent, the understanding of how power truly operates in our world." "Rory," Calder's voice carried a warning edge. "I mean no offense, of course." Marchmont's smile didn't waver. "I merely suggest that Miss Ashford might find the transition challenging. Highland society can be unforgiving to those who don't understand its rules." "Then perhaps Highland society should examine its rules," Marin replied coolly. "A system that values breeding over character says more about the system than about those it excludes." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Cressida and Marchmont exchanged a glance, quick, weighted with unspoken communication. "How delightfully progressive," Cressida said. "I'm sure such ideals will serve you well when you're navigating the complexities of the ton. They do so appreciate being told their traditions are worthless." "I said nothing about worthless. I said they might bear examination." "Of course you did." Cressida's smile was sharp as cut glass. "Though I must say, Your Grace, I didn't realize you'd be bringing a guest when we discussed the winter gathering. Had I known, I would have adjusted my expectations accordingly." "Plans change," Calder said flatly. "I'm sure you understand, Lady Cressida." The air crackled with barely contained hostility. Marin could feel the undercurrents swirling around them. Jealousy, calculation, social maneuvering so complex she could barely track it. "Well," Lady Thornwood said brightly, breaking the tension with practiced skill, "I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of Miss Ashford over the coming days. The winter gathering will be such an opportunity for everyone to become better acquainted." "Indeed." Cressida's eyes found Marin's and held them with predatory focus. "I look forward to learning everything about you, Miss Ashford. Everything." It wasn't a greeting. It was a declaration of war. And as Cressida swept from the hall with her mother and Lord Marchmont in tow, Marin felt the weight of that promise settle over her like a shroud. She had made an enemy, and something told her Lady Cressida Thornwood didn't make small enemies. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of social maneuvering and suppressed tension. More guests arrived, Highland lords and ladies, clan chieftains and their families, merchants wealthy enough to move in noble circles. The castle filled with conversation and laughter and the constant assessment of watching eyes. Footsteps echoed through ancient corridors at all hours. The kitchens worked without ceasing, producing feast after feast. Everyone, it seemed, had heard about the Duke's unexpected betrothal. Everyone had an opinion. Marin navigated it as best she could. Ailsa stayed close, offering whispered guidance and moral support. The Dowager maintained a careful neutrality that somehow conveyed conditional approval. And Calder played his role with convincing dedication, staying near her at meals, engaging her in conversation, touching her arm or her hand at moments calculated for maximum visibility. It should have felt like performance. Instead, it was starting to feel like something else entirely. "You're staring again," Ailsa murmured during the second evening's dinner. "I'm not staring. I'm observing. You're staring at my brother like he's a puzzle you can't quite solve. It's adorable and also completely obvious. Maren tore her gaze away from where Calder was engaged in conversation with a Highland chieftain. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Ailsa's grin was knowing. Just like he doesn't know what he's talking about when he asks me 17 questions about your preferences and opinions every time you leave a room. He doesn't. He absolutely does. Yesterday he wanted to know your favorite flower. The day before, your favorite book. This morning, he asked whether you prefer sunrise or sunset. Ailsa patted her hand. My brother has never shown interest in anyone's preferences in his entire life. The fact that he suddenly cares about yours is significant. Before Maren could respond, the dinner gong sounded, and the guests began moving toward the formal dining room. Calder appeared at her elbow, offering his arm with a small smile that made warmth bloom in her chest. Shall we? The Seilid was scheduled for the following evening, the traditional Highland celebration that would mark the official beginning of the winter gathering. Tonight was merely a formal dinner, but the weight of expectation hung heavy in the air. Lady Cressida had positioned herself at the far end of the table, where she held court with Lord Marchmont and several other guests. Her laughter rang out periodically, bright and brittle, her eyes finding Maren's with unsettling frequency. She was planning something. Maren could feel it. Ignore her, Calder murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. She wants you unsettled. I'm not unsettled. I'm vigilant. That's a generous interpretation. His hand found hers beneath the table, squeezing briefly. The contact sent warmth spreading through her entire arm. Whatever she's planning, we'll face it together. Together. Such a simple word. Such a perilous promise. Dinner concluded without incident, and the guests dispersed to the drawing room for conversation and cards. Maren found herself cornered near the fireplace by Lady Thornwood, who pelted her with questions about her family, her education, and her accomplishments. Each answer was received with a small sniff of disapproval, a subtle shake of the head, a condescending smile. And have you any musical training, Miss Ashford? Some. My mother ensured I learned piano and voice. How? Practical. Though I suppose formal training would have been beyond your family's means. We prioritized other qualities. Kindness, for instance. Humility. Lady Thornwood's smile froze. Qualities that will be tested, I'm sure, once you find yourself mistress of an estate like Dunmorrow. So many responsibilities. So many ways to fall short. Mother. Cressida appeared, her voice honey-sweet. You're monopolizing Miss Ashford. Surely she'd like to mingle with the other guests. Of course. Lady Thornwood withdrew with one final pointed look. Cressida remained, studying Maren with that unsettling intensity. Walk with me, Miss Ashford. There's something I'd like to discuss. Privately. Every instinct screamed warning, but refusing would seem cowardly, and Maren couldn't afford to appear weak. Of course, Lady Cressida. They moved toward the gallery, away from the warmth and light of the drawing room. Portraits of Blackwood ancestors watched from the walls, their painted eyes following as Cressida led her deeper into shadow. I'll be direct, Cressida said when they were sufficiently alone. I know what you are. I beg your pardon? A fortune hunter, a schemer, a desperate woman who saw an opportunity and seized it. Cressida's voice was soft, almost gentle. I don't blame you, truly. If I were in your position, impoverished, facing a life of drudgery, I might do the same. You're mistaken. I never sought— Please, Cressida held up one elegant hand. Spare me the protestations of innocence. It insults us both. She moved closer, her perfume cloying in the close air. Here is what will happen. You will end this engagement. Quietly, gracefully, in a manner that reflects well on everyone involved. You'll claim you realized your feelings were insufficient, or that the demands of the position exceeded your abilities. Whatever story suits you. And if I refuse, then I will make your life very uncomfortable. Cressida's smile didn't waver. I have resources you cannot imagine, connections in every corner of society. I can ensure that every door in Scotland closes to you. Every position you might seek, every place you might find shelter. Gone. Your family's situation is already precarious, isn't it? Imagine how much worse it could become. Cold swept through Marin's veins. You would destroy an innocent family to get what you want. I would do whatever is necessary to claim what is rightfully mine. Calder and I have been meant for each other since childhood. Our families have planned this union for decades. And you, a nobody from nowhere, will not stand in my way. The words hit like blows, but Marin refused to flinch. Has it occurred to you that Calder doesn't want you? That perhaps his happiness matters more than your plans? His happiness? Cressida laughed. Happiness is a luxury for common people. We are not common. We have duties, responsibilities, and legacies to maintain. Calder will learn to be content with me, as I will learn to be content with him. That is how marriages work among our kind. That sounds like a prison. That sounds like reality. Cressida's eyes hardened. You have until the Caelid tomorrow evening. End the engagement publicly. Claim whatever excuse preserves your dignity, and leave Dunmorrow forever. Or face the consequences. She swept away without waiting for a response, leaving Marin alone in the gallery, with the painted eyes of generations of Blackwoods watching from the walls. Marin pressed her hand to her chest, trying to slow her racing heart. The threat was real. Cressida had the power to do exactly what she'd promised. And what was Marin, really, but a convenient excuse? A temporary arrangement that had always been destined to end? She should take the offer. Save herself and her family the devastation that would follow if she refused. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Calder's face in the library, the vulnerability he'd shown, the way he'd said she made him feel less alone. Was that real? Or was it just part of the performance? She didn't know anymore. And that uncertainty was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. The Caelid began at sunset. The great hall had been utterly transformed. Tables pushed against the walls, floors polished for dancing until they gleamed like dark honey. Musicians tuning their instruments in the corner with a happy chaos of anticipation. Candles blazed from every surface, hundreds of them, filling the space with golden light that danced across the stone walls like living fire. Garlands of evergreen and holly hung from the rafters, filling the air with the scent of pine and celebration. The fragrance of mulled wine drifted from warming kettles, mingling with wood smoke and the distant sweetness of baking bread. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, but inside was warmth and music and the promise of celebration. Marin stood at the edge of the crowd in a gown of midnight blue that Ilsa had pressed upon her, watching the dancers swirl and stamp through traditional Highland reels. The energy was infectious. Even the most dignified lords abandoned their composure to leap and spin with the music, their kilts flying, their laughter echoing off the ancient rafters. For a moment, it was possible to forget the dangers lurking beneath the festive surface, but she couldn't shake the cold that had settled in her chest since Cressida's ultimatum. You look like you're facing an execution rather than a party. Calder appeared beside her, magnificent in formal Highland dress, kilt, sporran, the plaid of his clan draped across one shoulder, pinned with a silver brooch shaped like a stag. The tartan brought out the gray of his eyes, made them seem deeper somehow, more intense. Is everything all right? No. Nothing is all right. A woman who hates me has threatened to destroy my family, and I don't know if what I feel for you is real or just desperate wishful thinking." "I'm fine," she said, just taking it all in. He studied her face, seeing more than she wanted to show. "You're lying. You've been strange all evening. Distant. It's nothing. Marin." He said her name like a question and a plea combined. "Tell me." The music shifted, slowing into something sweeter, more intimate. A waltz with Celtic flourishes that made even the older guests sigh with recognition. Around them, couples paired off, moving together in patterns as old as the Highlands themselves. Calder held out his hand. "Dance with me." She shouldn't. Every moment she spent in his arms made leaving harder, made the pretense feel more like truth, made the inevitable ending more unbearable. She took his hand anyway. He drew her onto the floor, pulling her closer than strictly proper, and one hand, warm at her waist, the other clasping her fingers. They began to move, and the world narrowed to just the two of them, spinning slowly through candlelight and shadow. "Whatever's troubling you," he said, his voice low, "you don't have to face it alone. Some battles can only be fought alone." "That's not true. That's what I used to believe. Before." He stopped, his grip on her waist tightening almost imperceptibly. "Before you fell into that snowbank and turned everything upside down. Calder, I know this was supposed to be an arrangement, a performance to escape my grandmother's machinations. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like performance." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "At least for me." Her heart seemed to stop, then race. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when I look at you, I don't see a convenient solution anymore. I see someone who challenges me, who sees through my masks, who makes me want to be more than just a duke going through the motions." His eyes burned into hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "I see someone I'm falling in love with." The words crashed through her like waves against a shore. "You can't," her voice shook. "This was supposed to be temporary. In the spring, I leave. I go back to my life, and you— What if I don't want you to go? Calder, what if I want to make this real?" She stopped dancing. They stood in the middle of the floor, couples swirling around them, music rising and falling, and all she could see was his face, his eyes, the terrifying sincerity in his expression. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. For the first time in a year, I know exactly what I want." He cupped her face in his hands, gentle despite the intensity in his voice. "I want you, Marin Ashford, not as a performance, not as an arrangement, as my wife, my partner, my future." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But Cressida's words echoed in her mind. Fortune hunter, schemer, nobody from nowhere. "I'm not who you think I am," she whispered. "I'm not worthy of—" "Don't." His voice hardened. "Don't tell me what you're worthy of. I've spent a year listening to everyone else's opinions about what I should do, who I should be, who I should marry. I'm done. The only opinion that matters now is yours." Moisture burned at the corners of her eyes. "You're asking me to believe in something that feels impossible. Then believe in this." He kissed her. Not the proper, distant kiss that might have been excused as theatrical. This was real, his mouth claiming hers with a desperate hunger that stole her breath and set her blood on fire. She melted into him, hands fisting in his jacket, returning the kiss with all the feelings she'd been trying to suppress. The music stopped. They broke apart to find the entire hall staring at them. Guests frozen mid-dance, the dowager watching with complicated eyes, Ailsa grinning like she'd won a wager. And at the edge of the crowd, Lady Cressida Thornwood, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "Well," Lord Marchmont's voice cut through the quiet, dripping with false amusement. "It seems the Duke's affections are genuine after all. How touching." The spell shattered. Conversation resumed, though with a buzzing undercurrent of gossip. Couples began dancing again, stealing glances at the pair who just scandalized them all. Marin couldn't breathe. The kiss still burned on her lips, but now it mingled with fear, with uncertainty, with the knowledge that everything had just changed, and she had no idea whether it was for better or worse. "Calder," she whispered, "what have we done?" Before he could answer, Cressida appeared at his elbow, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Your Grace, a word? It's rather urgent. Whatever you have to say concerns your betrothed's brother, Hamish Ashford, I believe. He's been making rather interesting claims in Edinburgh. About debts, about desperation, about his sister's willingness to do anything at all, to secure a wealthy husband." The blood drained from Marin's face. "I don't know what lies you've been told," she started. "They're not lies, are they?" Cressida's voice was soft, sympathetic, and utterly poisonous. "Your brother has been quite vocal about your family's situation. The mountain of debt, your father's drinking, your mother's failing health, and his clever scheme to send his pretty sister north, where wealthy lords might be. Susceptible. That's not what happened, isn't it? Can you prove it wasn't?" Cressida turned to Calder, false concern dripping from every word. "I'm so sorry, Your Grace. I know this must be painful to hear. But surely you'd rather know the truth now, before it's too late." The quiet that followed was devastating. Marin watched the doubt flicker across Calder's face, the way his expression tightened, the walls rebuilding behind his eyes. "Calder." She reached for him. "Please. I can explain." "Can you?" His voice was flat, distant. "Can you explain why your brother is telling people in Edinburgh that this was planned from the beginning?" "I didn't know. He must have—" The words tangled in her throat. "It's not what you think. I never intended." "Intended what? To make me believe it was real?" He stepped back, putting distance between them. "To make me fall in love with you while you were planning how to spend my money?" "No." Moisture spilled down her cheeks. "I never planned any of this. I never asked for any of this. I just wanted to survive a snowstorm. And instead, I fell into a situation you exploited perfectly." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "Calder, please." But he was already walking away, his back rigid, his shoulders tight, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the floor while 100 watching eyes drank in her humiliation. She had to leave, had to escape before she shattered completely. Marin fled, through the doors, down the corridor, out into the snow-covered courtyard, where the cold bit into her skin like knives. She didn't stop for a cloak, didn't stop for shoes suitable for winter. Just ran, tears freezing on her cheeks, until the castle was a blur of lights behind her, and the darkness swallowed her whole. She didn't know where she was going, didn't care. All she knew was that the fairy tale had ended. And she was alone. The cold found her quickly. Marin stumbled through the snow, her thin slippers soaked through, her ball gown a useless weight dragging at her legs. The wind howled around her, carrying ice that stung her exposed skin like 1,000 tiny needles. Each breath burned in her lungs, each step was harder than the last. Somewhere behind her, the castle glowed with light and music and warmth. A world she'd briefly touched before it had been ripped away. She should go back. She knew she should go back. The rational part of her mind screamed that dying of exposure twice in 1 week would be particularly stupid, that whatever waited at Dunmorrow was better than freezing to death in a ditch, but she couldn't make her feet turn around. Marin! The voice came from behind her, carried on the wind. She ignored it, kept walking, one foot in front of the other, even as the cold seeped deeper, even as her vision began to blur. Marin, stop! Arms caught her from behind, spinning her around. Calder, coatless and wild-eyed, snow already accumulating in his dark hair. His hands gripped her shoulders hard enough to bruise. What are you doing? You'll die out here? Would that matter to you? The words came out slurred, her tongue thick with cold. I'm just a fortune hunter after all. A schemer. Probably deserve what I get. Stop it. He shook her, gentle despite the desperation in his voice. I was wrong. I was a fool. I let Cressida twist everything. And God, Marin, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't make it hurt less. I know. His voice cracked. I know it doesn't. But please, please come back inside. Whatever anger you have, whatever you need to say to me, say it somewhere warm. I can't lose you to the cold. Not again. Not when I just found you. She wanted to rage at him, wanted to scream that he'd believed the worst of her without question, that he'd taken Cressida's poisoned words over everything they'd shared. But the cold was stealing her strength, her fury, her will to fight. I didn't plan any of this, she whispered. I swear to you. Hamish is a fool who talks too much and understands too little. Whatever he said in Edinburgh, I never asked him to. I never knew. I believe you. Do you? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear? He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her, sharing what little warmth his body still held. I believe you, because Ailsa found me after you left. She told me what Cressida said to you in the gallery yesterday. The threats, the ultimatum. Marin stiffened. She was listening. She was worried about you, with good reason, apparently. He pressed his forehead to hers. Cressida's been planning this for weeks. She had people in Edinburgh spreading rumors, preparing the ground for tonight. When your brother showed up drunk at a tavern and started bragging about his sister's wealthy catch, it was too perfect for her to resist. Hamish. Marin closed her eyes against the pain. Of course, he never could keep quiet about anything. He didn't understand what he was doing. That doesn't excuse it, but... Calder's arms tightened around her. None of this is your fault. The only person at fault is me, for doubting you, for letting fear override everything I knew to be true. And what did you know? That you're honest to a fault, that you negotiate like a warrior and care for others before yourself, that you look at me like I'm a person, not a title, and that terrifies me more than anything Cressida could threaten. His voice dropped to a ragged whisper. That I love you, truly, whatever happens next. The words enveloped her like the warmth she desperately needed. She wanted to believe them, wanted it so badly she could taste it. Take me inside, she said finally. Please, I'm so cold. He swept her into his arms without hesitation, carrying her back through the snow toward the castle lights. She pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady drum of his heartbeat, letting it anchor her to the world. They entered through a side door, avoiding the great hall and its watching crowds. Calder carried her to the library, their space, their sanctuary, where a fire still burned and blankets waited, as if someone had known they'd need them. He settled her into a chair before the hearth, wrapping her in wool and fur, chafing her frozen hands between his own. Ailsa's gathering your things, he said, his voice soft. Fenella is preparing a hot bath. You need to warm slowly. Frostbite is a risk if we're not careful. Calder. She caught his hands, stilling their motion. What happens now? Now you rest. You recover. And tomorrow Cressida will still be here. The rumors will still be spreading. Your grandmother will still have doubts. Let me worry about that. How can I not worry? This affects me more than anyone. He knelt before her chair, his eyes level with hers. Then hear me when I say this. I am not letting you go. Not because of threats or rumors or social expectations. I have spent the past year being everyone else's version of a duke, doing what was expected, being who they needed, and it nearly killed me. His hands cupped her face with devastating tenderness. You brought me back to life. I won't surrender that. Surrender you. Without a fight. Warmth slipped down her cheeks, tears she couldn't hold back. Even if it means scandal, even if it means your grandmother's disapproval, even if it means all of that and more. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. I told you I loved you. I meant it. Did you? She thought of every moment that had led to this. The snowbank and the rescue, the arrangement and the conditions, the library conversations, the shared vulnerabilities, the dance and the kiss, and the devastating accusations. All of it tangled together into something she couldn't untangle if she tried. Yes, she whispered. God help me. Yes. I love you. His smile was like sunrise after endless night. Then that's all that matters. We'll face the rest together. Together. The word had never sounded so much like a promise. Morning brought clarity, and clarity brought purpose. Maren woke in her room to find Ilsa perched on the edge of her bed, a tray of tea balanced on her knees, and a determined expression on her face. Rise and shine, future sister. We have a war to win. What time is it? Early enough that most of the guests are still sleeping off last night's excitement, which gives us approximately 2 hours to prepare before the final day of the gathering begins. Ilsa pressed a cup of tea into her hands, the porcelain warm against her fingers. Calder's been up since dawn, strategizing with grandmother. Whatever differences they've had, they're united now. Cressida went too far, and everyone knows it. Everyone? Well, everyone who matters. The Dowager is furious, not at you for once, at Cressida for trying to manipulate her grandson so blatantly, at herself for not seeing it sooner. Ailsa's expression softened. She wants to speak with you, when you're ready. The Dowager's private sitting room felt different this time, less like a battlefield, more like a conference of generals comparing strategies. Sunlight streamed through the windows, softening the severe lines of the room. Miss Ashford, the older woman gestured to a chair. Sit. We have matters to discuss. Maren sat, bracing for another interrogation. Instead, the Dowager surprised her. I owe you an apology. The words hung in the air, improbable as snow in summer. Your Grace, let me finish. The Dowager held up one hand. I have spent the past year so focused on securing my grandson's future that I failed to see the serpent I was inviting into our home. Lady Cressida Thornwood is everything I thought I wanted for Calder, suitable, connected, and impeccable. She is also manipulative, cruel, and utterly without conscience. I'm not sure an apology is necessary. It is. The Dowager's voice brooked no argument. You tried to tell me the truth about yourself from the beginning. You negotiated fair terms. You conducted yourself with dignity despite every obstacle thrown in your path. And when my grandson doubted you, when he believed lies over truth, you had every right to abandon him to his fate. Her eyes met Maren's. You didn't. I couldn't. I love him. Yes. A ghost of a smile crossed the Dowager's severe features. I can see that now. I'm not certain when it happened. Perhaps it was all happening from the moment he carried you through that door. But it's real. That much is clear. Maren's throat tightened. Does that mean you approve? It means I'm no longer opposed. The Dowager rose, moving to the window, where morning light painted her silver hair with gold. My approval is conditional, Miss Ashford. You will need to learn a great deal about running a household of this size. You will need to navigate social currents that can destroy the unwary. You will face challenges that would break a lesser woman. I understand. I don't think you do. Not fully. But you will. The dowager turned back, and her expression held something almost like warmth. Calder has asked my blessing to make your engagement public and permanent. To marry you before the winter gathering ends. Marin's breath caught in her chest. Before, you mean today? This evening, specifically. Before the final feast, in the castle chapel, with every guest in attendance. The dowager's smile was grim. It's a bold move, unconventional. Lady Cressida will be humiliated publicly, and her family will never forgive the slight. But it will also make clear, beyond any doubt, that you are the Duchess of Dunmorrow, and that no rumor or scheme can change that. Isn't it, rather, fast? Fast implies uncertainty. Calder has none. The question is whether you do. Marin thought of her father, who'd married her mother within 3 weeks of meeting her, and never regretted it, despite everything that came after. Thought of her mother's words, that love required courage, that happiness was worth the risk of pain. Thought of Calder's eyes in the snow, desperate and raw and absolutely certain. I have no uncertainty, she said. Only fear. Fear of what? That I'll fail. That I'll embarrass him. That I'll prove everyone right who said I didn't belong here. The dowager crossed the room and took Marin's hands. The first time she'd touched her voluntarily, her grip was surprisingly strong. Listen to me, girl. I have watched every potential bride my grandson has been presented with. Cressida, yes, but dozens of others before her. Women with perfect pedigrees and perfect manners and absolutely nothing behind their eyes. You are the first one who made him argue with me. The first one who made him laugh. The first one who made him want something beyond duty. Her grip tightened. You will make mistakes. You will stumble. There will be moments when you feel entirely inadequate for the role you've accepted. But you will also bring life back to this house. Life it has been missing since my son died. Since my grandson retreated into grief and duty and emptiness. That is worth more than any pedigree in Scotland. Marin's eyes blurred with unshed emotion. Thank you, Your Grace. Thank me by making him happy. The dowager released her hands and moved toward the door. Now go. Ailsa is waiting with a wedding dress, and we have a great deal to accomplish before sunset. The chapel at Dunmorrow was ancient. Stone walls worn smooth by centuries of prayer, their surfaces bearing the marks of countless hands that had touched them, seeking comfort or blessing. Stained glass windows cast jeweled light across wooden pews, burnished by generations of faithful. Ruby red, sapphire blue, emerald green falling in patterns across the stone floor like scattered gems. An altar where Blackwoods had pledged their lives to one another since the time of Robert the Bruce, where love had been sworn and families begun and dynasties built stone by stone over hundreds of years. The air smelled of beeswax candles and ancient wood, of centuries of incense, and the faint, lingering sweetness of dried flowers pressed into prayer books. Tonight, every seat was filled. Marin stood at the chapel doors, her hand trembling on Ailsa's arm. The dress she wore was ivory silk, hastily altered from something in the family collection. The same dress, Ailsa had whispered with shining eyes, that their mother had worn when she married their father. Her hair was crowned with Highland wildflowers, preserved from summer in the dowager's hothouse. Delicate purple heather and white roses and sprigs of green that caught the candlelight. Ready? Ailsa whispered. Through the doorway, Marin could see the gathered guests, the Highland lords and ladies she'd met over the past days, their faces a mixture of curiosity and approval. The dowager, seated in the front row, her expression complicated, but no longer hostile, perhaps even proud. Lord Marchmont, watching from a corner with calculation giving way to something that looked almost like defeat. And Cressida Thornwood, forced by social obligation to witness the wedding of the man she'd schemed to claim as her own. Her face was a mask of perfect composure, but her knuckles were white where they gripped her fan, and her mother sat beside her, looking as though she'd swallowed something sour. But none of that mattered, because at the altar, waiting for her, stood Calder. He wore the formal dress of his clan, kilt and jacket, the blackwood plaid draped across his shoulder, a sprig of heather pinned above his heart. His dark hair had been tamed into respectability, though one stubborn lock still fell across his forehead. His posture was perfect, every inch the Duke of Dunmorrow. But his eyes, those gray eyes that had haunted her dreams since the moment she'd woken in his arms, held nothing of duty or performance or pretense. They held only love. "I'm ready," Morin whispered. The walk down the aisle felt both eternal and instantaneous. She was aware of every face turning to watch her, every whisper and every assessment. The rustle of silk and wool as guests shifted in their seats, the soft strains of a harp playing somewhere in the shadows. But she kept her eyes on Calder, letting his gaze anchor her, guide her, carry her forward. When she reached the altar, he took her hands in his. "You came," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Did you doubt I would?" "Never." His smile was the sun breaking through clouds. "But I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd run. I'm done running." The ceremony was traditional, the words ancient, promises of love and loyalty, fidelity and faith spoken in this very chapel for centuries uncounted. The minister spoke of duty and honor, but also of love, of partnership, of two souls choosing to walk together through whatever storms might come. Morin spoke her vows with a voice that only trembled slightly, each word a promise she meant with her whole heart. Calder spoke his like vows to God himself, his eyes never leaving hers, his voice ringing through the chapel with absolute certainty. When the moment came for the ring, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, passed down through generations of Blackwood brides, warm from being held close to his heart, Calder slid it onto her finger with hands that were perfectly steady. "With this ring I thee wed," he said. "With my body I thee worship, and with all my worldly goods I thee endow." The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Calder kissed her. Not the careful proper kiss of a public ceremony. This was the kiss from the Thalit, reborn, deep and claiming and absolutely certain. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his jacket, the cheers and applause of the crowd washing over them like waves breaking on a Highland shore. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, she caught a glimpse of Cressida's face, pale with fury, twisted with defeat, already turning toward the door with her mother in tow. "Let her go," Calder murmured. "She's lost. She knows it." "I almost feel sorry for her." "Don't. She would have shown you no mercy." He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. "Are you ready to face the feast, Duchess?" Duchess. The title that had seemed impossible now felt like coming home. With you. Anything. 6 months later, spring came to the Highlands like a benediction. The snow melted in rivers of crystal, revealing hills carpeted with heather and wildflowers, purple and white and yellow, blooming in riotous celebration after months of white. The locks sparkled under pale sunshine, their surfaces rippling with the movements of fish and the reflections of clouds sailing overhead. And Dunmorrow Castle, which had seemed so forbidding in winter, now glowed with warmth and life, its gray stones softened by climbing roses and ivy. Marin stood in the library, her library now, as much as it was Calder's. watching her husband sort through his father's books. He'd been doing this for weeks, finally facing the grief he'd buried for so long. Some days were harder than others. Some days, he needed her to simply sit beside him and hold his hand while he remembered. Today was one of the good days. Look at this. He held up a letter, yellowed with age. It was tucked inside my mother's favorite volume, the one Ilsa mentioned during the tour, the book Mother used to read aloud to Father every evening. I never thought to look inside. Maren crossed to him, reading over his shoulder. "My darling boy," the letter began. "If you're reading this, I've gone somewhere you cannot follow. But I need you to know." She read the rest in silence, her eyes blurring with unshed emotion. That love is never a risk. Love is the only certainty in an uncertain world. Whatever doubts you carry, whatever fears hold you back, remember this. To love and be loved is the greatest gift we're given. Don't waste it on duty alone. Don't let fear steal what could be beautiful. Choose happiness, my son. Choose love. Choose to live, truly live, for as long as you're given. Your mother, who will love you always. Calder's hands trembled on the paper. Maren embraced him from behind, pressing her cheek to his shoulder, feeling the tension slowly drain from his body as he let her hold him. "She would have loved you," he said hoarsely. "I know she would have. I wish I could have known her. You know her through me, through Ilsa, through every good thing she built in this family." He turned in her arms, cupping her face with gentle hands. "She told me to choose love, to choose happiness. I did. So did I." He kissed her, soft and sweet, and the library filled with spring sunshine streaming through tall windows, painting everything in gold. Outside the window, a carriage approached on the road from the village. Maren recognized the crest, her own family's, though their circumstances had improved dramatically since the wedding. Her father was recovering, slowly but steadily, finding purpose in managing a small textile venture Calder had arranged. Her mother had a cottage of her own on the estate grounds, filled with comfort and ease and grandchildren to spoil soon enough. Even Hamish had found honest work as a factor for one of the estate's tenants, kept out of trouble by the combined influence of ducal connections and sisterly threats. "Your mother's arriving early," Calder observed. "She's excited about the news." Maren's hand drifted to her stomach, where a new life had just begun to grow. "We should probably tell her before she guesses on her own. She'll cry. Of course she'll cry. She's my mother." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Are you happy?" She thought of the snowbank, where her old life had ended, the arms that had carried her to safety, the impossible bargain that had become an unexpected love, the family she'd found, the home she'd made, the future stretching before them like an endless Highland summer. "Yes," she said simply, "completely." And outside the library windows, the world bloomed with possibility. Thank you for listening. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that conquers fear, in courage that defies expectation, in endings that feel earned and true. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing for more romances with emotional depth and genuine connection. Until next time, may you find your own happily ever after.